Welcome back again, everybody. I'm Jody Rose Franko, and it's a pleasure to be here again with Citizens Television and having the opportunity to speak about travel. I'm the owner of Rose of the Winds Travel. We're a company in Floyd that specializes in all types of travel. If you want to go somewhere, we can help you get there. We focus on honeymoons and love doing family travel, business travel. And today I'm speaking to you about one of my favorite travel opportunities, and that's small group travel. Small group travel is a great way to see the world. You travel with, my groups are typically an average of 12. It's 8 to 16 people. And together we choose a destination, and I work with local suppliers. I scout out everything so that you have an immersive opportunity to learn about the culture in a place, about the landscapes, about the art, the history. It's very immersive and it's very special to travel together to these different places in the world. Today I'm going to take you to Scotland, quite associated with our Appalachian heritage. Last year in May, my husband Tom and I traveled there to scout out a trip that we're offering in 2019. We're going to head over there April 25th and return on May 4th, and it's a 10-day trip. And actually, it proved to be quite popular, as friends had said they wanted to go to Scotland. For the 12 people needed to go, we sold out in 4 days. So we actually opened up another date, May 25th to June 4th. So I'm going to tell you all about Scotland, about the trip that we took, the trip that we're going to take, and if you have interest, we'd love for you to join us. Let's go. The focus of our trip to Scotland is to explore landscape and culture and the natural wonders. But in that exploration, Scotland's so special because it has a mystical quality, a sacred quality, a quality that's ancient. And I am working with Webster of Tours of the Tour. He's an English gentleman who I have connected with, and he is going to lead our tours, and this is his specialty, the sacred as it exists in all elements of the culture and the society and the natural wonders. So we're really excited about traveling with him. He has done this trip numerous times. He specializes really in Celtic and Gaelic culture and history, and he is going to be our tour guide. When you think about Scotland, part of the UK, you can picture this northern area. It's a peninsula, it's the top of the island. And as an island, what you know is that it's surrounded by sea. So the sea has played a big part in the history of Scotland, as well as just shaping who the people are. It's quite lovely, and on some days it's calm and some days it's rough, and you are always affected by the sea in most of Scotland. Well, that sea gets inland too, so it's filled with rivers and lochs, and once again it's just quite lovely because of the water features that are throughout the country. Scotland, it looks like no other land I've seen. It has been heavily cultivated and has basically lost most of its woodlands. That said, they're doing a lot to cultivate new forests. There's a lot of agriculture that's happening there. We saw a little bit of wildlife, and the main wildlife that we saw were the birds. And we're going to take you on this trip to Lunga, which is a little island out in the wild Atlantic. And on Lunga, there's 247 species of birds, and one of those birds is the precious puffin. Natural wonders. There is so much land beauty in Scotland. There's vistas with the sea, there are mountains, there are the lochs, the ancient trees, and there's waterfalls everywhere. And we'll see many of those as we travel together. And then there's the castles and the historical features. The history of Scotland goes back to the earliest of centuries, and I have very, very, very much to learn about the history. But with tour, I am looking forward to going back to the most ancient people and civilizations that lived in Scotland, the Picts and the history that they left behind, and the invaders that came and changed the country through their cultural introductions. The English, there's just so much to see there that has to do with the history and how it's changed Scotland over time. My husband, Tom Franko, has been my trusted travel companion. He is fearless when it comes to driving on the left side of the road. I really can appreciate that, and a great navigator. And together he and I took off on this journey. I've been thinking about traveling to Scotland for a year and a half. After we decided that we were taking a group to India and Nepal, which we did back in 2016, I realized through speaking with folks in Floyd that while exotic and developing countries are of great interest to some, that there are many people that want to travel to more familiar places that they already feel a connection with. And Scotland was the country that rose to the top for this research and development of a trip. So Tom and I explored all of the opportunities in Scotland, and we put together a 10-day tour. The tour that Tom and I did varies a little bit from what we have developed for our clients. That being that I have an incredible passion for waterfalls and chose to go to many waterfalls throughout the trip. We'll include a couple of those waterfalls when we take clients in 2019, but we will insert all of the magical places that tours taking us to learn more about the history and the culture of the country. Here's a map of the United Kingdom, and if you look at the pink, that is Scotland. So our trip begins in Glasgow, which is the south central, a little bit western part of the peninsula. We started in Glasgow because there are fantastic flights from Dulles Airport. You can fly to Glasgow from any airport. You can also, for our trip, start in Edinburgh, which is not that far from Glasgow, and just transport over to Glasgow for the beginning of our trip. Tom and I began in Glasgow, and we made a giant horseshoe around the country, heading first west to the coast, up north to Skye. From Skye, we went around over into the Cairngorms, Aviemore, Perth, and then changing it up a little bit to do our trip with tour, we'll go to Loch Tay and Dunkeld, down to Perth, and then we finish down in Edinburgh. Well, we've all heard about Scotland and how lovely the weather is, so we were there in May. And all I can say about traveling in any weather is it's really up to your attitude and your gear to have a fantastic trip. When we arrived, it was cold and it was rainy. We got our rental car, we hopped in it, and we had about a 2-hour drive to our first stop. And over the course of those 2 hours, we got to see the passing landscape, we got to learn to navigate in Scotland, and the weather cleared eventually by the time we got to our location. So I just want to encourage folks, whenever you're traveling, best laid plans are great. You've got something to be your outline, but there is no controlling the weather. In traveling to some place like Scotland, Iceland, many, many other places, the weather and things change. So just be prepared to make the most of every situation, a little bit flexible, and you'll wind up having a great time. So our first look was looking over, this is Loch Lomond, and it was very rainy and very cloudy, and we went and got some nice Scottish tea and a nice bowl of soup, and we were glad that we were in Scotland and that we were dry and we were ready for our adventure. Our first stop was in Oban. And Oban is a seaside town that is on the southwestern part of the peninsula. And Oban is a gateway to many of the destinations out in the, I think it's pronounced the Hebrides, or yeah, probably the Hebrides. Oban in itself is a fascinating little port town. They've got some beautiful churches. They have some historical places. The downtown area is right on the port, and there are wonderful restaurants, some museums, and the docks. And we just spent a lot of time at the docks. There were people there that were travelers that we visited with, and a local family that had their own beautiful boat, and they had just pulled it up, and they told us all about what it's like to live in the area and just sail from island to island. McKegg's Tower is a pretty fascinating destination in Oban. Back at the turn of the century, McKegg decided that he would employ the stonemasons through the winter to build this vision that he had. And he kept the stonemasons employed, which was really a nice benefit for them. And his vision was for this amazing creation. After 5 years, he did pass away, and his family decided that they didn't want to invest in that anymore, so they call it McKegg's Folly. And it's kind of a funny thing, but at the same time, as you can see, it's quite extraordinary in its design, and it does become a destination for a lot of tourists that like to walk up there and get a beautiful view of the harbor. As you can see, the harbor is quite lovely, and it is on the western part of the country, so the sunsets are really quite magnificent there. We hiked up to an overlook. It was a little hillside very close to the hotel that we stayed at. And we knew we were going to get a lovely sunset, but what was really fantastic about it was this guide. And if you look at this guide, what it shows is here you are standing in this one place, and that little vista that you see, the point over there, this is its name, and it goes all around the circle, and it names everything that you're looking at. So it's really kind of a neat thing, and I think it'd be great up on top of the Buffalo. An Oban sunset. So we were in Oban. The next day we were supposed to take this cruise that I was very, very excited about. And the weather was horrendous, and the waves were so rough. And the company that sells this tour to go out into the wild Atlantic and have this great adventure said nothing goes out today. So that was canceled. We were not guaranteed anything on the boat for the next day, but fingers crossed everything would work out. So we were in search of adventure. And right outside of Oban was Dunstafna Castle. It was our first glimpse at this past life of what it was to be a Scot living on the coast. And it's fascinating to see castle after fortified home place. They find a rock and they build right on that rock. So if you look at the base of this castle, it is just a massive rock. And from that, they fortified up. And so we spent some time. The gardens around here were lovely. The woods, they do have some major forests still, not many, but there is woodland around some of the estates. And I think I saw why they believe in fairies. It's moss covered, there are rocks, the trunks of the trees, the branches, the birds. It's really magical. It's a place that you want to spend time. So day 3 of our trip, finally the weather had cleared some. It was still a chance of rain, but the boat company said, yep, we're going to go out today. If you'd like to come, you're welcome to come. So with Dramamine in hand, raincoat, and all the other gear, snacks, everything that we needed for this 11-hour adventure, Tom and I boated a ferry, and it's a large boat, the ferry that leaves from Oban to go over to the island of Mull. When you land on Mull, you board a bus, and on the bus you go up the coast. You go from Mull to Cregnear, which is on the eastern part of Mull, and then you climb up the northern coast of Mull until you get to a little town, a coastal town called Tobermory. Tobermory, we had about an hour till our boat was going to take off, and they've got a lovely bakery. They've got lots of gear shops. If you need a nice raincoat, they've got lots of cute raincoats in Scotland. But we waited that hour, and then we boarded a boat. And the boat has a simple indoor area for seating, and then it has seats on top. And I do get motion sickness and felt like I would be better off up top. So we took a seat up there, wind blowing in our face, and I don't know, maybe it was 45 minutes or an hour until we reached our first destination, which was the Isle of Lunga. Clouds and rain passed, but nothing really stormy. The seas were big, and it was okay. It's great if you're one of those lucky people that don't get motion sickness. That must be great fun. For me, with the Dramamine, I was fine with all the fresh air that there was. Riding out, we saw a lot of different vistas, sea vistas as well as little islands and things on the land. And again, I was really impressed to see out on this little jut of land, quite far from anything, there would be a homestead. And these homesteads, again, were rock fortified and built on stone. On Mull, it was really a beautiful ride just to see the landscape and how people are still living. These were two old boats that had long ago sailed their last trip. But things like that are quite lovely to look at. And if you like to take pictures, there's plenty to work with in Scotland. It's a lot of fun to photograph. We were in Tobermory, as I said, and it was a beautiful port town. We even saw rainbows over it, so we took that as a good sign for getting ready to go out to sea. Well, Lunga and the Puffins. It's an island out in the wild Atlantic, and it is a major spot where the puffins nest. I'm very sensitive to what it means to be a tourist in different destinations and how that impacts the local culture, the economy, the people, and the wildlife. I'd rather do good, I'm sure as you would, where I travel than to be causing trouble. What was fantastic on Lunga is that we as humans are actually benefiting the puffins. I'll tell you how. It's really interesting. So the puffins live on this island, and they're one of 247 species that live there. They're ground nesters, so they have burrows that they dig out, and they nest in there. Razorbills, and I have a lot to learn, other birds are predators of the puffins. So the puffins live this life of, protecting their young and trying to raise them and in fear of these predatory birds until the humans are on the island. And when we show up on the island, we scare off the predatory birds. And so the puffins come out of their burrows. It's a great sunny day when the humans are visiting. So this was a small group that day. We were only about 20 people. And the puffins just started popping out of their burrows. And as you can see by my photos, I was within 3, 4, 5 feet of the birds. You just sit there quietly, and they waddle all around you. They were still nesting, so we could see them taking the building material into their burrows. There weren't any babies yet, so we saw the male and the female tending to their nests and getting them ready. But it was really a treat, and this tour allows you time just to be there. It's not on the island, off the island real quick. I'm sure we had an hour and a half where we could get from the boat and walk up all along the coast and see this beautiful wild island. It was when the primrose were blooming. It was really beautiful. And we just watched the puffins and the waves breaking on the ocean, and as you can see, the sun was shining. It was a great time. Lunga's got lots and lots of wildlife on it. Some of the birds there include the puffins, the sea eagles, the guillemots, the gannets, and the razorbills. And in season, there's at least 2,000 breeding pairs of puffins. We did see gray seal as we were going in and out of the little islands. And some of the plant life that was there was the trefoil. There were lots of orchids, and like I had shown you, the primrose were blooming. So the other part of this tour, you've got the Isle of Lunga that you go to first. And then secondly, it's more of a boat ride, and you wind up at the Isle of Staffa. And Staffa is an island that a big part of it, if not all, the part that we saw, is basalt columns. And basalt columns are one of those things that really fascinate me. I don't know how many of you have had a chance to see them, but they occur in areas where lava has flown. And it's a special formation that when the lava covers land, over time, as it cools, it contracts and forms these typically hexagonal columns. If you've ever been to Ireland, there's the Giant's Causeway. And the Giant's Causeway, you see predominantly that from the top. And so you can see the hexagons and you see some of the columns. If you've been to Iceland, you can see giant cliffs and many, many places that have basalt columns. It's quite extraordinary there. Well, this is very similar if you can imagine your globe. So here's Scotland on the eastern part of, you've got Iceland, and then you've got Scotland over here. This Staffa Island is this giant rock that juts out of the ocean, and it's basalt columns. It's very, very extraordinary. And some days you can land on Staffa and explore the island and go into this magnificent cave. On the day we were there, the swells were 20 feet, and I have never been in a boat where you just ride these waves and go down into the troughs and come back up. And I was really glad that we had such an experienced captain of our boat, and all of the crew were coming out to look at it, and back on shore people were talking about it. It was really one of those extraordinary days where we had sun and we had these magnificent waves. And the sailors that were with us said it was a really rare day. So Tom and I felt really lucky that we got to witness it. So this is the first shot that we had of Staffa Island. And it really is extraordinary. There's these giant waves beating up against it. And it's a rock that has just held its own, and it's incredibly beautiful. It was so rough that day, there was not a chance that we were going to get to land the boat. So our captain, knowing the island, knowing the rocks all around it, was able to get close and then far away and turn the boat around. So each side, you know, where you were sitting, you got a beautiful vista of it. There's Fingal's Cave. which has inspired a lot of music. I think David Bowie did a piece there. Mendelssohn did the Hebrides Overture when he sat in there. The way that besides its beauty and its grandeur, there is a way that the wind blows upon it that makes a sound. So he was deep in this cave, deep in meditation, and was inspired to write the overture. Other famous writers that have been inspired by Fingal's Cave and this amazing island out in the wild Atlantic are William Wordsworth, John Keats, Lord Tennyson, and Queen Victoria also visited there and exclaimed how amazingly wonderful it is. They also say that Jules Verne was inspired by it when he wrote his 80 Leagues Beneath the Sea. So along the way, Tom and I found waterfalls. When we left, we finished this amazing boat tour. We came back and spent the night in Oban at a wonderful inn that I would love to take people to, Locknell Arms, that's over outside of Oban. We took off the next morning and we were heading north on the west coast. And along the way, we were heading to Skye. Along the way is Fort William. And Fort William is the Roanoke of Scotland, I suppose. It's what Roanoke wants to be, the outdoor capital. And it's really a gateway to much of the Highlands to the east. So we wanted to see what Fort William was all about, and we had a beautiful bed and breakfast that we stayed in. The views were gorgeous. And speaking to the innkeeper, which is always a great thing to do, they and then the owners of the hotel that we stayed at previously told us the places in Fort William that we didn't want to miss. So Tom and I knew that we weren't up for a major hike just because we had our schedule to keep. We went to Steele's Fall, and Steele Falls was beautiful. It was a wonderful hike. The Scottish are hikers, they're walkers. And so as a visitor in that culture, there are so many trails that have been well kept, well identified, with parking, maybe with facilities, maybe without. But it's really a wonderful place if that's your pleasure when you're visiting an area to take amazing walks. They have these hikes that go from north to south, east to west, all around. So if you want to be a through hiker, you can just take off with your bag and either camp, there's lots of camping there, or stay at simple little lodges along the way. So Tom and I wanted to understand what that was about, and we took advantage of seeing waterfalls all along the way. They had this steel cable bridge that the 30-year-old and me hopped right up on, and then the much older me got halfway across and thought, what am I doing here? There's water under me, and I got to go across, and then I got to come back, and it was really, really hard. All of a sudden, I was freaking out. Tom had no problem. He went back and forth, easily. Lucky him. So Ben Nevis is the highest peak in Scotland. I think it's the highest peak in the UK. And we saw young and old, all kinds of people taking off early morning just to head on up there. And it looked like if you wanted to devote the time and the energy, it would be an extraordinary thing to do. Eilean Donan is an amazing castle that's in Scotland on the west coast. And I've heard that it's the most photographed, that the history is phenomenal. And Tom and I chose just to do a drive-by because that is going to be one of the stops on our tour. So this is just a little glimpse at Eilean Donan. Have you heard of the Isle of Skye? Well, I think most people have. And it's so popular that it's the #1 destination when you're in Scotland. And we had heard how incredibly crowded it was going to be there and how, of course, amazing the landscapes were and what a great place it is to go visit. So yes, we really wanted to be there. And on our first day, we were a little crowd shy. So as travelers' fate would have it, we had an amazing day. And we had unexpected surprises, so I want to take you to some of these places. At the lodge where we were staying, there was a gentleman who was mowing the grass. And he was kind enough to stop and say hi to us as we were moving in. And we made some conversation and mentioned that we were looking for music, because we're always looking for music or culture, arts when we travel. And we were curious about what we would want to do that day. And he kind of mentioned you might want to stay on the Sleep Peninsula, which is where our hotel was. And there are a few things, and so we said we would go inside and investigate a little bit and, look it up on the internet and then talk to him later. Very modest, very kind, very nice man. When we came back out, the innkeeper was there, and she introduced us again to this man who was mowing the grass. And he's one of those gifts that travelers get every once in a while. His name is Paul Seidel. I really don't know how to say his last name well. His name is Paul. And he is a Gaelic scholar, a Gaelic poet, and an author. And he was inspired just in these few minutes that we met him to recite a little bit from a book that he's had published and to tell us a few stories and also to help us figure out our day and how we wanted to navigate this peninsula. And it really was magical. He spoke Gaelic in a baritone voice with all sorts of inflection and poetry. And he's written a book called Wonder in the Medicine Wheels. And in that book, it's a hero's tale of a young boy who wants to learn more about the secrets of life and of nature. And so I was very excited to meet him and learn about his book and to understand aspects of the Gaelic traditions. The Sleep Peninsula is the southwest bottom of the Skye Peninsula, of the Isle of Skye. And he said, do this road, turn here, turn left. I'm writing it down, trying to not get totally lost on directions. And he said, you will find the Dunscaith Castle. So that was our first place that we were looking for. And we did. We went down to the coast, and then we followed this road, and we followed that road. And as fate would have it, we found Dunscaith Castle. Teeny tiny little sign, and no other people there. And we walked across this fella's field, and he waved. That was all fine. And we get out there, and it's a look at the past. And so as you can see, it's quite the ruin. But when we looked closer, you could see how it was built, that it had grandeur, that it was also fortified, and that when the tide was up, it was surrounded by water and a moat. And when the tide went down, there was walls that you would have had to climb, and it would be very difficult to take over this castle. And the myth around this castle was fascinating. It says that the fairies built it in one night, and it's the legendary fortress of a Celtic goddess, and her name was Scatchith, and they called her the Shadowy One. She was said to be a warrior queen and a master swordswoman. And to add to the myth, she was undefeated. She held this castle for a long, long time. And part of her power came from these amazing swords that she had. And there was this teeny little island out in the water. And history says that that's where she kept her swordskeeper, her swords maker. He lived on this island, and he was part of the magic of her success. And it just really conjures up an imagination of what that life was like. Well, we found our music, and we're really, really grateful. On the Sleep Peninsula on the Isle of Skye, there is a Gaelic college, and it's, as it would appear, a Gaelic college is a college where they are being sure that the Gaelic language and cultures and traditions are carried forth and taught. It's also a well-rounded college where all of the course matter is taught in Gaelic. They have a very intimate performance space, an old stone building, and in there they have a group that puts on music and plays and storytelling and different cultural events. And we were very lucky that that night the world famous Poozies were performing there. And the Poozies are an all-female traditional Celtic band that were famous for their folk music back in the 70s. Mary McMasters was one of the founders of the Poozies. She is the only musician that is still with the Poozies, but they have continued all that time with new members. So they are currently 4 women that just put on an amazing show. They could play ballads that were heart-rendering. They played jigs and reels that you just couldn't stay in your seat. There were probably 25, 30 people in the audience. The bartender was telling me what kind of whiskey was the whiskey to drink, you know, where it was from, how it was aged, all the secrets inside of it. And we met some really nice Scots people there as well. So we've got some video of that you can hear some of their quiet music and then some of their really rowdy music. And we were invited to go out partying with them afterwards, but we were old and we didn't go. Probably would have loved it. But what was amazing was we left the show maybe at 11:15 and it was still light outside. It was like dusk. So that's in May. How long the days are was quite extraordinary to witness. The next day, we knew that we had a lot of physical adventures that we wanted to go on in Skye. So we went ahead and we headed north, and up north on Skye is Portree, and that's the big town that so many tourists really enjoy. And then north of Portree are some features that are quite extraordinary. So Tom and I went up to Old Man's Store, and Old Man's Store, as you can see, is this geologic wonder where soil has been washed away and stones are still exposed, and they have some demanding trails to get up there. It will be up to my groups that I travel with whether or not they want to do that hike. It was invigorating to do the hike. I really enjoyed it. I was really glad we got up to the top and the views were extraordinary. We also went up to Kilt Rock and Melt Falls. This is one of those tourist areas where the sights are quite extraordinary and the crowds are extraordinary. There were coach buses where 45, 50 people were getting out, a parking lot that was filled with people. And my sense of these very famous places is they can be worthwhile to see, without a doubt. And I become myopic. I appreciate that I am a tourist just like everyone else, and we all want to see it. And so it's great just to smile at everybody else that's there and try and get in and get your view, and then you get out because somebody else wants to get in. But what's extraordinary about Kilt Rock is, again, it's basalt columns. And the basalt columns are this giant cliff that goes down to the ocean. And when you look at it from a distance, it looks like a kilt. It looks pleated. So, of course, Scotland, kilts, yep. And then there's Melt Falls, which is just this extraordinary river that it just descends down into the ocean. And this is another area where when the wind is blowing, you can hear music. So luckily that was something we got to experience, and it was really beautiful. I think it was in the 70s that National Geographic wrote an article about Scotland. I need to look up the year. But in that article, they coined the term fairy pools. And they called the fairy pools, the name came from the fact that these waters that come off, I think, the Cullen Mountains, come down in these water sluices that fall over rocks and go into pools. And because of the light and the water, they create these really beautiful scenes. The color of the water is from translucent to turquoise to blue. And the rocks and the plant life and the moss and everything just creates these very magical places. So magic and fairies. National Geographic coined this term fairy pools, and since then those have become a major destination for people touring in Scotland. We had heard of the fairy pools and of course wanted to go. We had also heard how crowded they could be. The previous night when we were watching this amazing Pusey's concert, Scott sat next to us, a really interesting man who had retired and was telling us about his experiences living on Skye in the winter and weather and all kinds of things. And he kept mentioning the secret fairy pools. And he just sort of dropped that little secret fairy pool. Secret fairy pool. Yeah. About the third or fourth time I said, so are you allowed to tell us where these secret fairy pools are? And he said, I'll tell you. So he gave us again these directions, like, really, are we seriously going to find this? And Tom and I decided that we would do all of our adventuring all day. And 5:30 at night, when we're finally done with our day, we would go by the fairy pools. And of course, they wouldn't be as crowded because it's late in the day. And we would explore the fairy pools. 5:30, about 5:30. We're driving down the road. There's a little parking area that's jammed full of cars. There's tour buses on the side of the road. Tom is sure that there were 150 vehicles there. That means there were at least 200 people, 250, I don't know. Like when we looked on the trail, you could see person after person after person. And while I am understanding of that, I wasn't that excited about jumping out of the car and getting into the crowd. So we decided we'd go on this wild goose chase and we would look for the fairy pools. And we found them. And I don't know what the first fairy pools were like, but we were in pure heaven where we were. We walked up the trail and we saw the first pool. And if I never saw another fairy pool, I feel like I've been given a life gift. There was this, waterfall and water coming in and pool and rocks and quiet. Nobody else was there. You could sit on this rock and contemplate and climb up on this rock and look at this view, and the Cullen Mountains were up there. And we just kept exploring. We saw maybe 4 or 5 other people the whole time we were there. And Tom and I have built that into our upcoming tours as a destination, and we really look forward to taking people there. And we've created an amazing night when we're on the Isle of Skye. We've rented an entire building just for our group, and that evening Paul is going to come down and we're going to have a fireside chat where he will do storytelling and answer questions, whatever we want to learn and know about Skye, what we want to learn about the Gaelic culture, about Scottish culture. He's wonderful to speak with. And then we will make an amazing meal together, and we'll also have the evening, the afternoon, evening, and the next morning to, at our leisure, go out and look at the fairy pools and spend time there. So I really feel like that's one of the highlights of our trip that I'm looking forward to. There are many highlights, but that's a very, very special one. The Isle of Skye was pretty much our northern apex of our tour. From there, we headed east, and there's so many places that travelers can go in Scotland. There's Loch Ness. A lot of people like to go there and, look at the water and imagine and wonder if Loch Ness, that's the moment that the monster will appear. There's Aviemore. There's the islands to the north. There's, how long do you want to travel? We've built a 10-day trip. It can easily be a 2 or 3 week trip to see many, many, many more places in Scotland. Maybe we'll go back again and get to see some of them. So when we left Skye, we, of course, you know, we wanted to see the Highlands, and we went into a region south of Aviemore that is called the Cairngorms. And in the Cairngorms, again, it's this Highlands area that just has so many natural wonders. And there's a park system that we were sort of following what they had to offer. And Rogie Falls was one of the places we went. It was just one of those perfect walks. What was it, 2-3 hours, a really nice trail, a wonderful destination of the waterfall at the end. Not too strenuous, just perfect for me. The Cairngorms was established in 2003, and it's the second national park established in the UK, and it is the largest in the UK. It's the only one that has free grazing herds of reindeer, but we didn't see any reindeer. We were on the lookout. I think they were in the higher areas the time of year that we were there. And it's got quite the mountain range. It's the eastern mountain range that's in the Highlands. Tom and I were really curious. On one of the maps, we saw that there was a labyrinth. And so we thought, just as a little sidetrack, we might go explore that. And it's called the Touchstone Maze. And the Touchstone Maze has 81 different boulders that have been brought there to show the geological history of that area of Scotland. And it just creates a labyrinth. So it was a nice hike, and it was a beautiful place to be. And one thing I appreciate about this photograph is that you can see a harvested tract of forest. And that's a really, really common sight in Scotland. They still need all of the wood, and so they have a lot of managed forest. And so you see forests of all different heights in different places, just planted, growing, mature, harvested. You see it all. Along the way, there were places that we knew Tor would be taking us. And again, felt like Tor as our guide would enrich those stops so much more. So Tom and I did not visit them on our way south towards Edinburgh. We chose to spend the night in Perth. And I didn't know anything about Perth, and Perth isn't one of those destinations that has 16 things you must do in Perth. And we were quite enchanted by Perth that one night that we were there. We stayed in the Salutation Hotel, which is where I hope to take our guests. And the Salutation Hotel is an old, grand, beautiful hotel. The breakfast was extraordinary. The rooms, the crown molding, everything about it was just, I felt like I'd stepped back into, I don't know, the late 18th century staying there, early 19th century. It was really, really very special to be there. I also thought it was charming that the Salutation Hotel has also become a home for seniors. So there's like this whole residential wing of folks that live there, and they're down at breakfast, and they have all their needs being met there, and then there's the tourists that are there, and it just was really charming. Other charming things about Perth were the restaurants. Tom and I went to a Turkish restaurant that had tapas. So I think we had as many as 13, 14 different dishes that all came, and so we got to experience Turkish cuisine. They have restaurants of many other cuisines and nationalities, as well as great traditional Scottish food that how'd you like that? Oh, we loved it, and we looked at their menus. So a great place for dining. The River Tay, I think, goes through it, and it was just beautiful architecture all up and down along the river, and the bridges that go over it. The churches were really beautiful. You could see different styles of architecture, different materials that were used. And then the last thing that was really kind of fun was the town was filled with charity shops. We call them thrift stores. And these charity shops each were associated with a true charity. And so you go in there, and they care about their animals, and they care about all their different causes. And it added a level of appreciation for me to see, one, it's really fun just to go see the wares that they have, but I really appreciated the devotion people had to their different causes. The Salutation Hotel was quite famous in the day, and we saw pictures that the Beatles had stayed there, that Mick Jagger had stayed there, and then they had memorabilia from other poets and writers that had stayed there as well, and dignitaries. Scottish food, I found really, like Irish food, it's comfort food. We never got tired of it. We had amazing fish and chips. One of the dishes that we really enjoyed was Cullen skink. Like, what is that name? Cullenskink, Cullen skink. Cullen skink is basically a delicious fish soup. And by fish, it's the catch of the day, so it's all these different fish that you could enjoy. And it's topped with a mashed potato topping. Comfort food. It was great. There's also the traditional steak and ale pie. They had black pudding. Tried black pudding. It was I liked it. I guess everybody's heard of haggis. It's very famous because of what it is. It's basically offal. It's a mix of suet, oatmeal, all seasoned inside of a bag, quite often the animal's stomach, and it's all the offcuts that are edible. So it's organ meats and lungs. I took a bite or two, and it's not my favorite, but I think it's fascinating that it's one of the national foods. So if you're there, you might want to try it also. Of course, whiskey, spelled without the E, is a major product of Scotland. And now they're really into gin. There's all these gin clubs and gin bars throughout Scotland. So that's something that they're becoming very famous for. We went to the Falls of Brewer, another amazing waterfall. And what I loved about it as a tour leader is that a lot of people could be happy with that one stop. You've got the parking lot. You can go up the trail and do an amazing natural hike, but then there's a shopping outlet right there of all these amazing Scottish stores. So I think it would appeal to a lot of people. Gorse in Edinburgh. So we headed down to Edinburgh. And throughout the country, I had seen this yellow flower that was just covering hillsides along every trail. And I'd been really, really curious about it. So like on our second or third day, I queried a Facebook group that I'm part of for Scottish travel. And I said, what is this yellow flower? And I posted it. And honestly, I got 72 responses to that. I really hit a note that people were interested to speak about. And gorse is very similar to broom, except for it's got spines. It's invasive. And the flowers are edible. They use it to flavor gin. Of course, you can imagine it's a horrible allergen, so we were there for a high allergy season. In the Celtic tradition, they used to use it for Beltane bonfires. It's a symbol of the spring equinox and the Celtic god of light. They say when the gorse is in bloom, it's the kissing season, which I thought was really cute. And it's true what they say, it really smells like coconut. So that's gorse. We spent a couple of nights in Edinburgh and could have spent more. We look forward to touring it with Tour because there's so much history there. We really just scratched the surface. But we decided for our one real full day that we were going to go ahead and go to the Royal Mile. And the Royal Mile starts up at the top as Edinburgh Castle, and it meanders down, and at the bottom is the Holyrood Palace. And the Holyrood Palace is the Queen's official residence in Edinburgh, and it's where they keep the royal history. And while we were there, the Scot Guard were practicing their bagpipe parade. The Edinburgh Royal Mile is packed full of official buildings, tourist shops, and museums, and street performers as well, which was really kind of fun. Tom and I popped into this one little garden, and it was a formal garden. That was lovely. And then we also toured a museum that I love, and it's a very local museum. And this museum told the story of what it was to live right there throughout time. And during industrialization, it showed the hardships of being a working person, if you were lucky a working person. It talked about what the sanitation was, what the health was, what the different guilds were, that if you were lucky enough to have work, what work you could do. It talked about class and royalty. I highly recommend it. I can get the name for folks if they need it. This piper was piping along, standing on the side of the, he was a street performer. And he just played and played and played. Kilts are commonly worn in Scotland. There is the kilt for your clan, and then there's a kilt for your allegiances too. So my guess is there are people who are good kilt readers and can look at a kilt and say, oh, that's so-and-so. It was awesome to see just how widely worn they were, and there were many women wearing kilts as well as men. Our Discover Scotland trip features much of what I've spoken about, and then it features many other highlights that tour will be taking us on. One of those is Rosslyn Chapel, and Rosslyn Chapel was famous before Dan Brown's book, but it certainly is filled with all sorts of mystery and history. And it's definitely going to be a place that is a highlight for many, many travelers. Some of the folks who have signed up for our first tour say this is the place that they're most excited about traveling to. A lot of the history there has to do with the Holy Grail, and it has quite the connection to the Freemasons. Dan Brown's book is The Da Vinci Code. Another place that tour is going to take us is Kilmartin, and that'll be on our first day. And Kilmartin is an area that is just jam-packed with all sorts of monuments of the past history of the Picts and the people that were the early people of Scotland. So we'll be going there with tour. And like I had said, we're also going to go to Eilean Doonan Castle, and that was a 13th century castle, and it was made famous in some of the James Bond movies. Here's a photograph of Tor, and he's quite experienced. If anybody is curious to know more about him, he's got a website, Tor Webster, or Tor's Tour of the Tour. You can learn about him. And if you Google Tor's Tour of the Tour on TripAdvisor, he is #1. People that tour with him really appreciate what he brings to the experience. Wonder and the Medicine Wheels is Paul's book, A Rainbow Warrior's Tale. It's available on Amazon, and I have a copy and would be glad to share it with folks if they're curious. The entire book is written in verse, which at first I thought was going to be a daunting task to read. It's not an easy read, but if you get into the spirit of the book and read it, it washes over you like a magical experience. I highly recommend it. As we hiked, as we moved around, there were so many beautiful things that I wanted to sort of keep forever. And I find that photography can be one of those things that helps you hold on to the magic. Some people are writers, some people are photographers. Whatever your pleasure is when you travel, it's just extraordinary to be able to visit a place and then that place lives within you throughout your life. And I loved these rocks, and I was thinking, oh, which rock can I take home? And couldn't take home any rocks. I didn't have room in my suitcase. I couldn't manage the weight. And I just realized, I'll take a picture. I'll remember these amazing rocks. The other thing we always bring home from our travels are sweet memories, new friends. So I just want to wish everybody happy travels, safe travels. I would love to be your helper for your next travels. I have a website, www.roseofthewindstravel. My email is jodyroseofthewinds@gmail.com. I really appreciate Hari and Citizens Telephone for this opportunity to take you to Scotland. I can't wait to take you other places, and let me know where you want to go. Thank you so much.